President Biden says there are no circumstances under which the U.S. will be sending troops into Ukraine. His remarks come as the U.S. is preparing thousands of troops to head to Eastern Europe if Russia invades its neighbor. The military has started shipping defense equipment and ammunition to Ukraine. The president does maintain that he would impose heavy sanctions should Russian President Vladimir Putin go through with now what seems to be an inevitable invasion. In response to the U.S. and NATO's threatened intervention, Russia announced that it has started conducting new military drills, including testing short-range ballistic missiles near the Ukraine border. Democratic Congresswoman Cheri Bustos from the 17th District of Illinois joins us now for more on all of this. Congresswoman Bustos, thank you for joining us at such a critical time.
Sure, thank you.
I'd like to start by getting your take on the situation in Ukraine. What do you think of the action the White House has taken so far, and what are you most concerned about?
You know, I've been in the car a lot today. I was in Peoria, Illinois earlier. I'm in Rock Island, Illinois right now, and was listening to some of the coverage. And I actually like to listen to Fox News as well to kind of see what is the narrative that's out there. Part of which was there was a criticism about being there too late, the Biden administration being on board too late. I want to back up to a month and a half ago. I'm on the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, and we were briefed in a classified briefing a month and a half ago with representatives of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of Defense's office. So this is not a matter at all of the Biden administration not being on top of this. We're ready. And look, we've got a president of the United States who believes in diplomacy, believes in bringing in our allies, does not believe in going it alone. And I think that's the right approach. Russia will face severe, and I do mean severe, economic sanctions if they make any move here. And so the Biden administration is ready for that. We've got 8,500 troops on standby. We are working with our allies. And I think the moral of the story right now as we're having this conversation is the Biden administration is ready.
You know, there are some members of Congress who have been clamoring for more briefings. Are you in that camp? Do you feel like you're getting all the information that you need? And where do you fall on this debate that really appears to be heating up in Congress over whether the U.S. should take more action now, sanction them now, or wait?
Well, look, I have trust in the Biden administration. Like I said, I looked at the date of when we were part of a classified briefing. It was December 2nd. And right now, I was just with Senator Durbin just 2 hours ago. He was asked about this as well. The people who need to be making decisions and be in positions to make decisions in real time they've been briefed on this. We're in session next week. We all fly back out to Washington on Monday. And as far as anybody needing to be briefed, we can get briefed at any time, but we'll be back in session next week. And I don't know what that schedule is yet as far as any classified briefings, but I don't think we're going to be left in the dark. We also have these dynamics of the Olympics coming up. And we know that Putin and Xi will likely be in sync on this. So if anything's going to happen, again, I can't obviously speak from the administration's perspective, but we've got some time to get this figured out in a way that is going to make the most sense for America.
Congresswoman, I want to get your take on the atmosphere on Capitol Hill right now. You recently said that there are too many people serving as members of Congress right now that I not only don't look up to, I have zero respect for, and I'm saddened to have to say that. Now, I'm not going to ask you to name names, but it does sound like you're saying you've seen a decline in the caliber of people coming into Congress. Did that factor into your decision to retire at the end of this term?
Let me give you a little context for when I said that and what the questioning was around. It was around January 6th. And I happened to have been on the floor that day of the, and I don't hesitate to call it an attempted coup, especially the more information that we find out about this. But, look, the best thing that happened out of January 6th was that democracy prevailed. That while lives were threatened and our safety was under attack, It was literally one of the worst moments in American history. But the good thing that happened is after we were whisked away under armed guard to get into a safe location, we were all in that room together, Democrats and Republicans, and the Speaker of the House comes in and says, we're going to go back into session. And in the end, we voted to certify the election results that clearly, after all these investigations, it was a free and fair election. So the context of my statement was the fact that we had so many people from the other side of the aisle. I'm a Democrat, but and all the Democrats voted to certify the election results. But we had way too many people on the other side of the aisle that made a decision not to certify the election results. It is really, really hard to have respect when you have colleagues who didn't respect the vote of the American public. So that was the context of those remarks. I've been in Congress now. By the time next January 3rd of 2023, I will be done with my 5th term, and I'm not running for re-election. So I've been at this for going on a decade now. And yes, January 6th played into my decision not to run for re-election. But I also have really high hopes when I see some of the people who are running in some of these open seats. I hope that we will shepherd in the next generation who will be leaders in this country and won't have that baggage of January 6th, if they were on the floor, or to see their colleagues not vote to certify these election results. They won't have that baggage. So my hope is that we can start fresh. We'll have a new generation of leader coming in, and we'll be able to help get this country back on track again.
You know better than anyone how difficult it can be to run in a swing district or a swing state. You have managed to do it successfully several times. But I wanted to ask you about Arizona Democrats who just censured Senator Kyrsten Sinema, your former colleague in the House. And as you know, she represents a swing state where registered Republicans actually slightly outnumber Democrats. She does vote with the president more than 90% of the time, but then again parted ways with this administration on key aspects of the president's agenda. What's your take on the decision to censure her? Does it signal that there isn't room for dissent within the Democratic Party, or do you think it was the right move?
Well, I don't like dem-on-dem public dissension, especially to that level. Kyrsten Sinema and I were both elected in 2012 to the House, so we were classmates. That's actually how we characterize it. And she supports voting rights, and that's really what this was about. What she didn't support was changing the filibuster in any way. She has principled beliefs about why she does not want to change the filibuster. And look, it just shows that we have to keep working on issues to make sure that we bring, whether it's Senators Sinema and Manchin on board, or whether we get bipartisan support and bring more Republicans on board. We just have to keep working. And, Kyrsten Sinema and I were lucky enough to serve with John Lewis. And many of those who, are in Congress right now, we were lucky enough to serve with John Lewis, the late, great civil rights icon and champion. And he used to always talk about how the fight for civil rights and for voting rights is not a day-long process or a week-long process. It's a lifetime process. So we are going to continue to work. It would be nice, by the way, if we could get 10 senators who would just, say, hey, I'm going to vote for what I voted for, that passed unanimously when George W. Bush was president, and to make sure that we have voting rights laws that protect the voter and the sanctity of elections. We had 98 senators who, under the George W. Bush administration, voted for the Voting Rights Act. And now, here we are in 2022. Why do we not have unanimous support now to make sure that we get this in the right place? So I would prefer to say, let's get voting rights passed. But let's do that with seeing if we can get some Republicans to be supportive of this. Because this is about the American public. This isn't about Democrats or Republicans. This is about making sure that our elections, which are really the sanctity, the part that is so special to our democracy, making sure that we protect that. It's nothing more than that. But look, I'm a team player, and I believe that as Democrats, when you have disagreements, they shouldn't always be through the media. They shouldn't be through these public fights, but rather let's keep working hard to get key legislation passed.
You have run campaign efforts for House Democrats before. When you look at the numbers, 28 House Democrats, yourself included, and counting, retiring at the end of this term, what do you think your party's prospects are for holding on to control of the House? And do you think that these incumbents are talking about the right issues, focused on the right issues, or do they need to be focused on something else?
Well, as I look at, for instance, I represent the entire northwest corner in the state of Illinois. And when I look at the candidates, the Democratic candidates that are running, absolutely some remarkable people. And so I think that the key to this will be making sure that we get great Democrats to come out of the primaries that fit their districts. That is critically important. Not everybody fits their district. I come from I'm a Democrat in a district that Donald Trump won in 2016 and in 2020. And so there are certain people whose politics wouldn't fit very well in a congressional district like this. So I think that's number one. Number two, look, we've got to be focusing nonstop on, looking at things like the supply chain that people actually talk about now and how we're going to bring that home, making chips here in America. The announcement by General Motors today, investing $7 billion in building electric vehicles in the state of Michigan. Things like getting the inflation under control. So supply chain, inflation, making sure that, look, right now, workers, the ball is in their court right now. Wages are going up, but we've got to control what we can, bringing that supply chain home, getting inflation under control, focusing relentlessly on people and what they care about when they go home at the end of the night, or for that matter, people who shower, after they get home at night. I have a son who's a sheet metal worker, and, we can't forget those who have jobs where, they shower before they go to bed at night and after they come home for the evening, and how we're going to make sure we're getting things right by all families, whether you're a teacher or a nurse or a sheet metal worker or a police officer. Those are the kind of things that we have to focus on as Democrats.
Always comes back to those pocketbook issues that people talk to you about when you see them in the grocery store. Congresswoman Cheri Bustos, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's great to see you. Thank you so much.